sorry, but this story is pretty terrible. The plot points make little, if any, sense, and the overall narrative is so full of gaps and holes that it renders the continuation of Ezio's story seem unbelievably unbelievable. This story is not a full-fledged cinematic experience like Assassin's Creed 2 was, where we had a somewhat coherent plot through line, clear objectives, involved characters, and fairly interesting dialogue. It's an add-on, a DLC. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is a very small, focused story littered with problems. Everywhere. The problems are everywhere. Now listen, before you click off the video, I want a chance to explain myself. I understand I am not a writer, and never will be. I can put together scripts for videos and present myself in a manner that makes it seem I can convey ideas fruitfully, but I am no story crafter. But even with these facts in mind, you cannot deny that this story is fundamentally illogical and downright confusing in even the simplest moments. Listen to my arguments coming up and ask yourself, is Gino just a crazy guy on YouTube that can't write stories himself and therefore can't understand them? Or does he have rather logical points to make? You decide. Here we go. Let's start with the good stuff. I love that this story deals with the growth of the Assassin Order. After it's made clear to the Brotherhood that the Borgias had gained considerable, maybe even dominating, influence over the city of Rome, they were aware of the situation and devised plans to dismantle that influence as fast as they could. In this planning, Ezio had the sense to tell Machiavelli that a couple, even a few, assassins won't be enough. The Brotherhood must expand and grow in order to spread the dismantling of this oppressive Templar influence in multiple areas across multiple regions. This was great, and is probably the most logical point of this story. I also don't blame Ezio for coming to this conclusion, because we all saw in the last game that Ezio had to do pretty much everything for the assassins in their efforts to bring the Templars to heel. Ezio attaining the rank of Master Assassin and Mentor is well deserved. He has been working for the Brotherhood for north of 20 years now, even when some of these years he didn't even know he was doing so. Machiavelli relinquishing his position of Mentor to Ezio makes some sense, as the last game had clearly shown that he had allowed the Templar influence to infect not only the highest echelons of the most powerful organization in the most popular religion at the time, but also the highest positions in the governments of Italy. Yeah, this guy had to go, and a new era of the Brotherhood dawning with a younger, more charismatic, and honestly more active mentor than the Order had yet seen was quite enjoyable to be a part of. What else? Oh, outside the elements I'm going to be complaining about in a minute, I do think the imagination involved in the revisionist nature of this story is rather compelling. Doing my research on this story allowed me to learn a ton about Rome and a lot about the historical figures during this time. The numerous members of the Borgia family, the French military elite, a few of the papal members and staff, and even a couple of the Roman political figures, to name a few. Although these characters were relatively few and far between, it was entertaining to dive into the history behind them. Unfortunately, this is where we take the path less traveled and dig into the negatives of this story. Why is it the path less traveled? Well, because this game is an 8.7 out of 10 on IMDb, an 8 out of 10 on IGN, even if I trust IGN as much as Tiger Woods a fair apology, and on Steam it's rated a 9 out of 10. I even said in my Assassin's Creed 2 look back video that this game was better than the second. However, I think I have the answer as to why the ratings in my former statement are the case. I will explain in my gameplay section. So, we are going against the grain here. Are you brave enough to stick with it and stay by my side? If yes, let's begin. The Borgia have taken over a bulk of the region, namely Rome. The way the game presents this almost makes it seem like it's a totalitarian dictatorship. The soldiers use and abuse the citizens, the politicians are fearful to speak up, the state's tax money is used almost exclusively on weaponry or lavish sexual fiestas, and the military is present on every corner. In addition, the ones in power are not a select few of differing individuals that all work together in this dictatorship. They are all a part of the same family. Painting a situation in this light begs two questions. Where are the assassins, and what are they going to do about this? They're fantastic questions, and I believe players came into this game thinking that they were going to journey through this peril just as they did in the second game, moving from region to region, working with the local assassin leaders to bring down the biggest players who are moving the pieces from the background. But this is not at all the case. Let's answer these questions together. The assassins are here, right? Well, yeah, but that's not necessarily the case. We have the mentor of the assassins here, Machiavelli, but he doesn't actually do much. He seems to be the kind of mentor who schmoozes and crafts the relationships with foes and allies alike, which is fine. Everyone works with their strengths to get by in life. But what exactly is he doing in Rome? We already know he doesn't work in the field. Fieldwork seems to be exclusive to both La Volpe and Ezio, with the potential argument able to be made for Bartolomeo. Also, Ezio makes it abundantly clear rather early on in the story the utter lack of allies the assassins have.
Now I propose we begin planning our assault on the Borgia.
Oh, you think we are ready for such an attack?
See.
Do you know, for instance, where the Borgia troops took Caterina Sforza?
What?
Are you also unaware that the Borgia have captured the Apple of Eden?
How could we have lost the apple?
So, you do not know what goes on with our enemies. Do we at least have an underground here to work with?
Hardly. Our mercenaries are ensnared in a losing battle with Cesare's French allies. We have girls working for us in a brothel, frequented by cardinals and other important Romans. But the madam there is lazy, and would rather attend parties than further our cause.
What about the city's thieves? Do they have a guild?
See, but they refuse to talk to us. I don't know why. What are you going to do?
Make some friends.
And this, of course, is what propels the plotline that deals with increasing the Brotherhood's numbers later. So he isn't germinating relationships either. If you want to play the devil's advocate here, you could say he deals with the lack of assassin recruits in Rome. But even this doesn't work, because from the very onset, Machiavelli was against Ezio's very sane and logical idea of recruiting.
What do you intend to do?
We will recruit him to our cause.
You cannot be serious.
So, if we're a fly on the wall, watching the assassins group up to devise the plans for Rome's liberation, we shouldn't exactly be too thrilled with his presence.
Brace yourself.
Claudia is here, and this is nice to have someone running the brothels, gathering intelligence, but this only works under 3 assumptions, and these are major assumptions, not to mention that all 3 need to become reality if her presence is to yield something even remotely useful. First, you have to have the people you need information from to purchase your services. Are all Templar soldiers, politicians, and citizens allied with the Borgia horny, prostitute-using simps? Second, you need them to actually reveal the information you need from them. Is the game really telling me that there isn't a single individual who allies with the Borgia and uses Claudia's services that is able to hold their tongue? They are in business with perhaps the most powerful family in all of Rome, who are placing the city's throat underneath their boots, command armies of thousands and thousands of seemingly loyal and competent followers, and who have formed military and economic relationships stretching all the way to France and their royalty. All of this, and the individuals who come in just spew forth all information you ask of them? Okay, the last assumption is probably without a doubt the most far-reaching of the 3. Which is saying something. This assumption lies in the information gathered from these customers actually being useful. Why would the ones who are entering these establishments and willing to let loose information by the paragraph, ones that are close enough to the inner circle to actually know anything useful? If so, why are they there? Don't they have more important things to do? If not, why don't they just attend one of the numerous lavish parties Juan Borgia throws day and night? Why go to a piece of shit hole-in-the-wall brothel for your pleasuring needs? Are you scared your leaders won't be happy seeing you attend? Why would they care? They themselves are there. None of these assumptions are ones that an individual with an IQ over 40 would place stock into, and what a surprise, all of these assumptions actually come into fruition for the Brotherhood throughout the story. So, sure, Claudia here is useful, but only useful because the story wanted her to be. If this narrative took its plotline seriously, I highly doubt anything beneficial would foster from the use of the brothels throughout Rome. But make up your own mind, I guess. Bartolomeo is here, and having a commander of a mercenary army, and obviously the army itself, is great to have in this conflict. But he seems to not really be giving a fuck about the loss of the apple to the Templars at all. We find him more preoccupied with the fighting against the French and Borgia militaries. Fighting, even defeating, these armies won't mean anything though. Why, you ask? Rodrigo is in possession of the apple. How does Bartolomeo know the Pope won't just walk out of the city and take over the minds of both armies and commanders? Engagements with these groups mean absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things if, in the end, the Templars still hold the apple. There is nothing stopping them from using it. He might adhere to assassin ideology, which elevates the idea that use of these pieces of Eden go against free will, which is exactly what they fight for. This very idea will be discussed in a minute. But Rodrigo and Cesare are not assassins. They aren't even neutral. Remember Savonarola from the second game? He wasn't a part of either the assassins or Templars, but after he found the artifact, he moved on Florence like the Nazis into Poland. If someone neutral like Salvi was indeed willing to use it, then why wouldn't the Templars be? They are the antithesis of everything everything you stand for. Their very ideology encourages use of these artifacts, fighting military campaigns on two fronts under the assumption that not one of the numerous enemies who have access to the Piece of Eden will use it against him and his army is mind-boggling to me. Bardo should have taken his assassin duties more seriously. He should have abandoned his mercenary work and focused on the more important matters at hand with his order. Let's dive a bit deeper. Bartolomeo's character in the story is confusing to say the least. After knowing that Mario, Ezio's uncle, a fellow assassin, brother to the prior mentor, and perhaps the most efficient agent the Order possessed in the country, was killed, and after knowing that the Apple of Eden was taken by their mortal, ideological enemies, Mario instead chooses to spend his time watching boxing matches in the basement of his headquarters.
As you can see, this board shows the ranks of our top warriors. Prove your skills, and you will move up the list.
Shouldn't I already be at the top?
Jam's fighting downstairs.
If you're looking to show off, we also have fights. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got money on this match.
Hey, Ezio! Your loving uncle was murdered protecting the virtual command center of the Assassin Brotherhood in Italy from an army commanded by the son of the Templar Grand Master? And this aforementioned son has stolen the very artifact with the power of illusionary mind control that I went to war for on numerous occasions with multiple enemies on several fronts in a span of many years? Ha! Grab a beer, let's check out this next fighting match. Like, what the fuck?
Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got money on this match.
What the fuck?
When attempting to breach the French garrison, Ezio, Bartolomeo, and several soldiers come up to the fort, and Bartolomeo laments the fact that the walls aren't able to be traversed and calls his men back.
The entrance is thicker with Frenchmen than the streets of Paris.
So we will climb the battlements.
They cannot be scaled.
You know that Ezio is literally by your side right now, right? Why don't we just come back later in the night and climb the battlements ourselves to unlock the gates that block our entry? I can do it right now even. Look! If someone wants to tell me that Bart is talking about the inner, higher wall, then you'd have to explain to me how Ezio is able to traverse the Castello in this manner and not be able to climb this thing. Additionally, the game wants us to believe that Bardo is in command of an army of mercenaries. But each time we see them, even times we are tagging along in a military operation, we only ever see a handful of these guys. It makes his big dick energy shrink into a chode, especially when in-game dialogue makes it seem that he is barking orders to large contingents of platoon and company-size elements, when in reality, the cutscenes show like 3 or 4 guys.
Fall back!
After fighting through the breached walls of the fortress and becoming blocked by the French gates later, our dude Bardo begins harassing and verbally ridiculing the Baron for cowering behind locked doors and barred gates.
Steal a man's wife and then go hide inside a fortress? Nothing hangs between your thighs. In fact, there is a hole there, so deep it reaches into the maledetto.
But this is exactly what he was doing when his wife was kidnapped. He was doing the same thing this Frenchie was doing.
Bonjour, Général d'Alviano. Êtes-vous prêt à vous rendre?
Why don't you come closer and say that? Perhaps you could teach me, and I would instruct you in fighting. Since you seem to do so little of it, my Lady Bianca will whisper it in your ear. Kill you for tutto francese! I'll get you pezzo di merda!
Sorry, I don't speak Italian.
Like, dude, make this guy make sense.
Andre fire.
Antonio, get the fuck out of here. Even with all this bullshit, you don't hold a goddamn candle to Bardo in terms of sense and logic. Please, I beg of you, get the fuck out. But our boy does have a point. Actually, where the hell is Antonio? Not that I'm complaining, but why in the world isn't his dumbass here during this conflict? Where are Big Titty Teodora and Paola? Teodora's contributions in the second game were incredibly vital to Ezio's success in Venice. She seemed to me to be a uniquely intelligent and strategic asset to the Brotherhood. Her presence here would be quite useful, and it's confusing that she, Paola, and I hate saying it, but Antonio aren't here in this story. The Assassin Order should be firing on all cylinders, exhausting all alliances, and leaving absolutely no stone unturned in this fight. Their ancient enemies have succeeded in attaining one of the very items the entirety of the Assassin Order works to keep away from them. This is their one and only job. This is it. Why isn't everyone here? Their absence might be brushed aside by ones who claim the story is coherent, but it's noted on my part. Let's move to Lavope. Although I might commend him on his efforts to remain by Ezio's side in missions throughout the story, little of the subplots involving the fox make much sense at all. It's my belief that the writers knew this game had so little content in terms of story that they had to inflate its length by artificially crafting dramatic tension between our thief and our beloved mentor, Machiavelli. Lavope is hesitant to work with Ezio in bringing down the Templar Grand Master and retrieving the apple because he suspects the mentor to either be in league with the Templars or at the very least usurping assassin efforts in the conflict. But why? First of all, nothing should take priority over a piece of Eden being captured, let alone by Templars. But why does he have these suspicions? What has Machiavelli done to convince him of flat-out betrayal? In the second game, when Ezio first engages the Grandmaster in combat, Machiavelli was there to assist us. Why would he fight against the Templars to make sure they did not take possession of the apple if he was a traitor? When Ezio proved himself to be loyal to the assassin cause, he welcomed the young man into the order. Why would a traitor to the cause induct competent, strong-willed fighters into the group? When Ezio, Mario, Machiavelli, and Leonardo were examining the apple, the mentor hands the piece of Eden to Ezio personally. Why would a turncoat do such a thing? If any time was the right time to take possession of the artifact, it would have been then, right? Lavope wasn't even there to be a voice against the decision, even if he was already suspicious. Wouldn't traitor Machiavelli just advise Ezio that it would have been a better idea for assassin leadership to hold it rather than a new recruit? If any of my viewers are screaming at me to look at Al-Moraline's betrayal in the first game as a perfect example of why Machiavelli's actions could indeed be suspicious, I would counter back with this. Yes, he set loose Altair to kill Templars, but he never engaged them himself. Yes, he did raise Altair into the Order, but he didn't induct him into it. Altair was born into the Order. Lastly, not only would it be totally lame to pull the same story bits twice for a different game, but Morley never handed the apple over to Altair. He kept it from him 24/7 before he took over Masyaf. So no, Morley's betrayal doesn't set a precedent for Lavope's suspicions, and I was never once convinced that Machiavelli was a traitor. Good try though. A for effort. The Fox's suspicions make little sense to me, but these surface level questions are not the only things working against this man's multiple doubts. Near the middle point of the story, when Lavope first discloses his distrust of their mentor to Ezio, Ezio rebukes it right away, but chooses to give his friend the benefit of the doubt for the moment.
You want to put my spies to work?
Then join me.
In aiding Machiavelli? No thank you. That man is a traitor to our order.
A serious allegation coming from a thief. What is your proof?
This benefit consists of Ezio joining Lavope on tailing their leader to one of Machiavelli's informant meetings. After the meeting, though, Lavope immediately changes his mind and says he trusts Ezio's intuition.
What a night this has been.
Volpe, listen to me. I know what we saw, but you have nothing to fear from Machiavelli. I am sure of it.
I have you to thank for saving Claudio's life. If you believe Machiavelli remains loyal to the Order, I trust you.
The fuck? What's with the sudden switch in mindset? Well, even if this is confusing, it's just the beginning. Later, when the plan to steal Pietro's key becomes Ezio's goal, the Fox again changes his mind, in the middle of an assassin operation, and mentions to us that he can't handle the idea of Machiavelli working against the Brotherhood, and straight up threatens to take care of the mentor if we don't take care of him ourselves.
Ezio, Machiavelli has betrayed us. We would both wish to deny it, but the truth is now clear. Do what needs to be done.
What the fuck are you talking about?
If you don't, I will.
You have no proof, no witnesses. You just have theories. Just conjectures.
Like, dude, grow some balls, finish this mission with me, and we'll talk about this later. So, ignoring the baffling switch in Lavope's opinion yet again, I began to think about how Ezio was going to prove their leader's innocence. There were so many ways to do this. Ezio could have a conversation with the thief outlining the very things I mentioned earlier. He could facilitate a sit-down with both parties to talk out the grievances. He could even wait to obtain the apple and use its powers to look into the truth, much like what he does at the end with Cesare's escape from papal authorities. However, the confusion continues. The Fox's threat against Machiavelli made me believe that there were going to be several missions with the objective to, like I said, prove his innocence. But after learning about the Monteregione traitor, Ezio races to save Machiavelli from the thief's assault on him.
I was right. I have to stop La Volpe before he gets to Machiavelli.
But why? No time has passed to allow us to disprove Lavope's suspicions, and he only threatened to take out Machiavelli if we didn't do anything ourselves. Why would Ezio think he was on his way to kill the mentor? Well, maybe it's just a one-off time of nervousness, right? Nope. Not only is Ezio puzzlingly assuming Lavolpe was going to off the leader, but Lavolpe himself is actually going to do that exact thing. The fox stated he would do it if Ezio wouldn't, but Ezio hadn't done anything yet. He had no time to act on the threat. Ezio, I strongly believe that our leader is working against us. I know I thought this earlier and then changed my mind to then trust your instincts, then reverted again back to my initial suspicions in the middle of an assassin operation, then told you to prove to me that he wasn't a traitor, then completely ignored you and any efforts you might have made in order to prove the mentor's innocence, and decided to attack anyway. Aren't I a great example of assassin behavior? The actual nature of the Lavolpe betrayal subplot makes even less sense than any ridiculous answers one might have to the questions I've asked about the matter to begin with. The betrayer was revealed to not be Machiavelli, but some random thief from the Montedegione assault earlier in the story. The developers knew this was so out of left field that they felt the need to insert a flashback sequence showing players who the fuck this guy even was.
Stop! Wait for us!
We thought you had been killed, Sir Ezio.
Not yet.
Where does this passage lead?
To the north, outside the walls.
Let me through. I must go help the troops.
Apparently this guy is a Venetian thief named Paganino, but this only raises more questions. Why was he in Montedegione at the time of the attack? Is this one of Lavolpe's men? He's from Venice, right? So isn't he a part of Antonio's guild? If so, why isn't Lavolpe suspicious of Antonio? How did he know about the secret door that led to the rear of the fortress? Why was he on his way down the shaft if his plan was not to go down there in the first place? He only turned back around once Ezio entered the cave system, so why wouldn't he just join Ezio? Especially if the elimination of both Ezio and his order as a whole was your goal. If Ezio was indeed totally and completely unaware of this man's allegiances or intentions, then why don't you tag along with Ezio down the escape tunnel and stab him in the back? It doesn't even matter if someone nearby ends up killing you for the attack. You have such loyalty to the Templar cause that you kill yourself later in the story for it. How did this lowly thief know anything about the Assassin Order as a whole, its members, their base locations in Rome, their operations and objectives in Rome? How did he know where the Roman Thieves Guild compound was for the attack? If he knew Ezio was still alive after the Montedegione assault, why would he travel to Rome if there was a possibility of being recognized? Not only that, but isn't it just so convenient that we find him right after Lavolpe voiced his threat, and right before Lavolpe's assassination attempt? He's just walking around in Rome, right where we were. It doesn't make any sense. There are so many holes here, so many gaps. There are questions within questions. Each question posed brings up like 2 more questions, and all of them have no answers. Baffling stupidity. This whole thing. It's simply a pathetic attempt of creating tension between characters that have had no tension before with the purpose of elongating the story, and none of it makes sense.
Yesterday?
Then join me.
In aiding Machiavelli? No, thank you. That man is a traitor to our order.
The next day.
Volpe, listen to me. I know what we saw, but you have nothing to fear from Machiavelli. I am sure of it.
12 seconds later.
If you believe Machiavelli remains loyal to the order, I trust you.
A few minutes later.
Ezio, Machiavelli has betrayed us.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Come, Niccolo. It has been far too long since we've talked.
You're a fucking idiot. This needs to stop. Now.
Let's keep going. Rodrigo Borgia is of course still alive and operating in this narrative, and his story here is quite strange. Honestly, I think his part is both good and bad, for various reasons. We learned in my Assassin's Creed 2 look back that the Templar Order was hindered by Rodrigo's leadership. This was due to his insatiable thirst for power instead of a drive to bring humanity together under one banner, which is the Templars' true goal. So, let's look at our villain a bit deeper. Rodrigo was able to not only lead his Brotherhood in the infiltration of Italy's various governments, but also penetrated the sanctity of the Catholic Church by climbing the ranks and earning the title of Pope. He mistakenly believed he was going to be the prophet and interact with the Isu, or possibly God himself, and failed to accomplish his goals of attaining true, almost metaphysical power. Not only was he indeed not this prophet, but he also lost the apple and the papal staff of Eden. One thing about the Brotherhood version of Rodrigo that is quite interesting is his shift in ego.
We did not agree to conquer Italia.
If your brilliant Captain General says we can do it, why not rejoice and let it happen?
You risk upsetting the delicate balance of control we have worked so hard to tighten.
I appreciate all that you have done for me, but I have the army, so I am making the decisions. Don't look so bad. Enjoy yourself.
The assassins murdered him.
But why did you not stop them?
As if I could. It was not my decision to attack Monteriggione. It was yours! It is high time you took responsibilities for your actions.
My accomplishments!
He seems to be less aggressive and more hesitant to carry out his plans, whatever those actually are. Come to think of it, the Pope does barely anything in this story. Rodrigo is in possession of the apple for a sizable portion of the plot and does next to nothing with it. I don't really think this makes much sense. Why wouldn't he be using it all over Rome at this time? I'm guessing Ezio's actions, namely all the assassinations around Italy, and maybe even Ezio's mercy on Rodrigo himself during his Vatican attack, had humbled the Pope. After doing some research on the character, the wiki claims Rodrigo was broken and defeated. He apparently had no desire to continue fighting the assassins and wanted instead to simply preserve the Templar influence instead of spreading it. But why attempt to preserve influence of a faction whose very mission is to dominate and control the minds of the masses? No wonder Cesare is so aggravated with his father. The Grand Master's actions make little to no sense, and I'm not sure whether this is something the writers actively wanted players to notice and piece together for themselves, or if it is a major oversight and deconstruction of a character. I don't think I enjoyed his part in the story. I assumed Rodrigo would have been absolutely overjoyed when his son brought him the apple, and he would have immediately started using it again to attain more power and control. Maybe even return to the Vatican and attempt to regain possession of the Staff of Eden. Instead, we have an antagonist here that ruled his order with an iron fist last game, was defeated, then turned into a peace-loving ruler who wanted nothing to do with enemies of his ideology. And these enemies desire nothing more than the complete destruction of him and his allies. I mean, think about it. Rodrigo taking the apple only to hide it away from its use is basically what the assassins would do with it. One could maybe argue his reluctance to use it was due to his defeat in the Vatican, an argument I'm still not buying, but then why not give it to his son to use? Cesare asks for it multiple times and even ends up killing him for it, but him not allowing Cesare to use the apple for his order's objectives is out of character and confusing to me. So, in short, although I like the idea of Rodrigo warning his son to basically not anger the assassins, respecting their prowess and willpower I assume, I don't find these actions believable, and it's a bit sad that Ubisoft went this route with the main villain from the second game. This leads us to Cesare Borgia. In real life, this man was competent and cunning, even being the main influence behind the real Machiavelli's book, The Prince, despite what Ubisoft wants us to believe.
I intend to write a book about you one day.
If you do, make it short.
In this story, however, he seems to be all over the place. He doesn't know how to get what he wants, even when he retrieves the apple from Mario. If he was so hungry for power, why not go against his father from the very beginning? He should have known about Rodrigo's change in motivations pretty much right after his father's defeat in the Vatican. Moreover, when taking the apple and handing it over to the Grand Master, wouldn't your next question be, so father, how and when are we going to first use this? Instead, it seems like he handed over the apple, then allowed Rodrigo to hold it for what seems like years. Actually, it was 3 years. Yes, 3 years. The wiki claims Cesare handed it over to Leonardo for study in order to develop advanced weaponry, but I failed to see this cutscene in the game. His movements and behaviors are so sporadic and so pathetic, it's surprising that anyone chose to continue following him. But this is all due to a single major problem. This problem is Ubisoft attempting to adhere to real history. This adherence can be commended, but boy does chasing Cesare only to have him escape the area like 5 times over get old. Here we have a Templar who led a coup against his own order and failed to hold it together. He built alliances with foreign powers but failed to keep his union with the church intact. He amassed great armies who could not hold a single city, and he stole one of the most powerful artifacts on planet Earth and wasn't smart enough to use it in any significant way. Each time we encountered Cesare was almost a joke, because not only were we armed with the apple, rendering the fighting involved almost pitiful to say the least, but his dialogue and demeanor gave off an aura of awkwardness and disorganization.
I am ill, you idioti! Micheletto will soon be here with my armies, and then you will see how quickly the assassini fall!
You delude yourself, Cesare.
God! Send now, assassino! My sword will take your life. Guards! Guards! Guards!
We have decided to elect Della Rovere to the papacy. We are sorry.
You will regret this decision!
Assassino! Run!
Hired men promise you their blood, but as soon as you need help, they turn against you.
Guards! Micheletto's troops mass behind me. We will take back my city once and for all!
By order of Pope Julius II, I arrest you, Cesare Borgia.
No! 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 My funds, my troops, gone!
Financial difficulties strike all of us, even those with an army.
You intend to give me money?
No.
Tear the maldito bastardo to pieces! Guards! 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 Guards!
I did not feel this way with Rodrigo, or even Mualim in the past 2 games. What I remembered about the villains in this game being better than the second entry was incorrect. Embarrassingly so. Actually, did you guys notice the utter lack of villain dialogue here? Or even villains in general? This was even worse than it was in the second game, which I butchered the hell out of in my look back for it. Ubisoft invented random bad guys with little to no relevance to the story in an effort to craft a full-fledged AAA experience with hours of gameplay, but failed to insert any sort of quality with the villains here. Over and over and over, we kill Templars and get nothing. No explanation, no justification for their actions. Not even dialogue. Ezio kills them, says rest in peace, then walks away. Listen, the Templars in this series are meant to be villains for the assassins, not objectively terrible, evil people. The joys of following an ideologically and philosophically driven story involve the provision of thought-provoking dialogue and ideas. These opposing factions force us to think about our own worldviews and how different experiences of different peoples lead to different outcomes and actions. This sad, low caliber of villainy is everywhere in this story. An example of this garbage lies in the first Templar agent we assassinate, El Carnifice, an executioner for Cesare, and a particularly brutal one at that. He would execute civilians and criminals alike, chop off body parts of their then lifeless bodies, and parade them in front of applauding crowds. Before Ezio's arrival to the city, this guy raped an innocent woman, charged her for who knows what, then hanged her afterwards. Is this what the Templar Brotherhood has sunk to? Members like this? The Templars uphold the values of humanity's unification and perfection, global peace and prosperity. It makes no sense whatsoever for this dude to be in the Templar ranks. I understand that Rodrigo's leadership in the Order ended up being looked down upon by 21st century Templars later in history, but I find it incredibly far-fetched that he or even his son would employ someone this evil and disgusting. Villains like this make the ideologies and philosophies moot in this story, because you don't need either to want to kill this guy. I talked extensively in my first look back about how incredible the dialogue was with Altair's villains. Each one of them had rational, logical justifications for their actions that led a player to think to themselves, oh, I didn't really think about that. Maybe before killing this guy, Altair should have talked to him and had him lay out his reasons for performing whatever actions he was performing. I even thought this way. The writers made even me second guess whether killing certain Templars was ethical.
How can you claim to speak for the citizens? You stole their food, disciplined them without mercy, forced them into service under you.
Everything I did to prepare them for the new world. Stole their food? No. I took possession so that when the lean times came, it might be rationed properly. Look around. My district is without crime, save those committed by you and your ilk. And as for the conscription, they were not being trained to fight. They were being taught the merits of order and discipline. These things are hardly evil.
No matter how noble you believe your intentions, these acts are cruel and cannot continue.
We'll see how sweet they are, the fruits of your labors. You do not free the cities as you believe, but rather damn them. And in the end, you'll have only yourself to blame. You who speak of good intentions.
This is the entire point of having a narrative that lacks moral objectivism, the idea that there are preconceived concepts of what is considered good and what is considered evil. It's inherently understood. It doesn't need justifications or explanations. Assassin's Creed isn't supposed to be like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, where everybody knows who the good guys are and who the bad guys are at all times. In Star Wars, the Sith are 100% evil and the Jedi are 100% good. In Lord of the Rings, the Dark Lord Sauron is 100% evil and Aragorn is 100% good. This series is more like the TV show 24, my favorite TV show by the way. In 24, we witness the protagonist, Jack Bauer, perform ethically gray and sometimes unspeakable actions in an effort to do good. Is torture wrong? Is torture of evil people wrong? Is torture of evil people to save good people wrong? These questions make you think. Jack's actions make you love him at times and hate him at others. That's the point. But here, we're killing crash test dummies who were written to be bad men and moving on right after doing so. The only ones who get dialogue are Cesare and Juan, and even then the dialogue being uttered wasn't incredibly interesting. This laziness is so blatant, it stretches everywhere from the side characters all the way to the villains. And it's a shame. Ezio was somewhat untouched by this laziness. Being the main protagonist obviously grants us more insight into his character and actions, and this forces the writers to produce ideas on where and when to use him throughout the story. And thank God we still had him here, because if we didn't have Ezio's charisma throughout the narrative, I probably wouldn't have even finished it. Almost all the ideas Ezio comes up with make sense. He wishes to establish the alliance between Monteregione and Forli, he wants to increase the Order's numbers, he wishes to spread the Brotherhood's influence across multiple regions, and he even hides the apple away at the end of the story. But there are a few gripes I have with our hero. First off, I praise Ezio's choice to spare Rodrigo's life in the second game. I didn't really agree with his choice, but I understood why he might have made it. Ezio claimed that killing Rodrigo after stopping his plans, proving that he wasn't the prophet, and once again taking back the apple wouldn't bring his family back.
Get it over with, then.
No. Killing you won't bring my family back. I'm done.
In my mind, Ezio is pretty much thinking, I've neutralized this man as an enemy, and I'm leaving him with nothing more to strive for. Killing him would serve nothing but my vengeance. Although I might have some arguments to make against this line of reasoning, there is some truth in the logic here. I will admit that, from a narrative position, I believe this whole plot point was largely forced due to the realities of history, as Rodrigo did not die in 1499, but rather in 1503. However, I think the writers did a fairly good job attempting to adhere to history and make Ezio's actions sensible simultaneously. But in Brotherhood, Machiavelli's scorn for Ezio's actions in the beginning of the story immediately makes our assassin change his mind. Here, almost half the story involves us attempting to assassinate Rodrigo once again. Wasn't there a character arc Ezio went through that taught him killing in revenge wouldn't bring him his family back? If your argument here is that he realizes his assassin duties should supersede his personal growth and comes to terms with the blunder of mistaking mercy for an enemy with the neutralization of said enemy, then why does he allow Micheletto and Lucrezia go free later in the story?
I am not yet dead. I did not come here to kill you. He who is the cause of someone else becoming powerful is the agent of his own destruction.
You can't have it both ways. You can't pick and choose which plot point involves character growth and which do not. The logic here is flawed. The through line of Ezio's personal journey is riddled with problems that revealed themselves from his behavior. How can I accept that Ezio believes killing his enemies sometimes doesn't need to occur when he is running around killing his enemies? Ezio spends his time dispatching Templar leader after Templar leader, but chooses grace when the leader of these leaders is beneath his boot? You might recall what I said earlier and argue Rodrigo is discouraged from continuing the war after what had happened to him. So what Ezio did ends up being somewhat beneficial for the region, but Ezio did not know that his decision in the Vatican would humble Rodrigo in the future. The Pope could have gotten up and devised Templar plans that were even more aggressive and unethical. This is what happens with his son, does it not? Cesare in this story doesn't have the apple and is already bloodthirsty and power hungry. Then Ezio witnesses him lose his armies, his finances, and his position in the Catholic Church, and what happens? He ends up escaping prison and amassing even larger armies with even more foreign powers to lay siege to entire cities. I'm just failing to understand what the writers wanted us to take away from Ezio's more peaceful motivations earlier in Assassin's Creed 2. Allow me to discuss something else about our hero that might seem off track, but will loop back into what we've been discussing here. Ezio, after retrieving the apple, decides to relentlessly hunt down Cesare after the Templar coup. Ignoring the fact that Ezio again agrees that the Templar leaders need to die for the sake of humanity, our assassin carries with him and uses the apple against Cesare and his forces. Let me say that again. Ezio uses a piece of Eden against humanity to further his goals. And Ezio doesn't use it sparingly either. He uses it quite liberally, killing and, I assume, destroying the minds of almost all the men charged with Cesare's protection whenever chasing down the Templar. Keep in mind that Cesare gets away from us close to 4 to 5 times throughout the story, so his use of the apple doesn't end up affecting Cesare's life, only the ones who are attempting to protect their leader. You might say that utilization of pieces of Eden against Templar Templars specifically is an exception, but is every soldier serving under the Borgia family name a Templar? Are they even privy to the Templars' goals and motivations? Are they even aware of the existence of this order? I would say no, and I don't think that that claim would be an unfair stretch in logic. So, a member of an order who believes use of specific metaphysical artifacts against humanity is unethical and must be stopped is using the same metaphysical artifacts against humanity. Has anyone else seen the hypocrisy here? The Assassin Brotherhood doesn't even understand this artifact in its entirety yet. Use of this piece of Eden at all is quite illogical, as nobody understands both it and its powers fully, but its use outside the confines of Assassin walls is downright stupid and irresponsible. To tie back into the topic from earlier, Ezio seems to have absolutely no problem slaughtering scores of, we can rightfully assume, innocent and ignorant soldiers with an artifact that he isn't supposed to be using in the first place. But the character arc Ezio went through in the second game tells us that unnecessary killing sometimes isn't the correct way of reaching your goals. It's like there are two Ezios, one that is learning from his experiences and one that never did. Which Ezio are we playing as? Cesare's escape from prison is fine later in the story, but the scene in which Ezio learns of this escape is totally and completely random and contrived. Our assassin is conversing with Leonardo, then out of nowhere starts to ponder the Templar statement, "Chains will not hold me." After this, the apple reveals that the Templar had escaped prison? Like, what? This is so strange, so weird. It's absurd. It's a lazy sequence of writing to artificially push the story in the direction the writers want it to go in. They want audiences to simply brush the ridiculousness under the rug and just play along with the narrative. Ezio getting pressed into action here makes no sense and comes out of nowhere. And look, I'm sorry, but I can just keep going. Consider the alliance between the thieves and assassins. As mentioned in my second look back, the thieves we come to meet in much of the games are ones that have allied themselves with the Order, as their adept free-running and knowledge of the cities they operated in proved quite useful to the Brotherhood. These guilds even have codes they adhere to so that they don't antagonize the assassins. Namely, they steal only from those who can afford it. The rich, basically. Because modern writers want you to believe that crime severity is subjectively based on who you do it to. Stealing from the poor? Wrong. But stealing from the rich? Justified. Why? Because it's assumed the rich had already stolen from the poor. Guilty until proven innocent. It's not necessarily evil to view crime this way, it's just operating under assumptions, not proven factual knowledge. Where my deontologists at? Assumption-based behavior can be dangerous, and I personally would be very careful employing and working closely with an already morally gray faction who operate under such conditions, especially if my organization deals with fighting for the fate of humanity's free will. But that's just me. Their leader is Levolpe, at least in Rome, a member of the Assassin Brotherhood and an active participant in the war against the Templars. The thieves conduct raids and searches, employ hit-and-run attacks on specific targets, lure away security forces, and even steal various items or objects to assist the Fox and, ultimately, the Assassin Order in their efforts. But it's completely unknown what they do and do not know about this ancient conflict. Are they aware of the Pieces of Eden? Well, yeah, because Levolpe tells us that they were searching for it earlier in the story.
One last thing. I need your spies to find the apple. It has been taken from me.
We are searching the city for it already.
Molto bene. Come to Isola Tiberina with your findings.
What are the politics involved with this knowledge? Do they know about the Isu or the first civilization in general? The global presence of the Templar Brotherhood? Do they know the creed of the assassins? The members of the Order? They seem to know who the assassins are, but do they understand what the Brotherhood fights for? Their goals and objectives? What drives their members to action? Their ethics and limits? None of this is explained. This is a major plot hole, and I cannot brush this aside. I would have greatly appreciated some conversations Ezio could have had with Levolpe in this game, and even in the second game. In the previous title, Ezio was being brought up into the Order. He was learning about the realities of the world and what it took to confront them. Why would he not have any inquiries whatsoever about factions that work alongside this enigmatic Brotherhood of assassins he is just learning about? Ezio not only failed to ask about this faction when he was being groomed into the Order last game, he failed to inquire about them here, where he is made mentor of the Italian Brotherhood. If I was the leader of the assassins, I would have a long conversation with Levolpe about his group. You need some help, Ezio? Here, start with these 3 questions. How much do they know? Do they understand, at the fundamental level, why we fight the Templars? The thieves should understand what assassins are fighting for and all the costs that are associated with their failure. Can they be trusted? Remember the betrayal that led to La Volpe assuming the leader of the assassins was in bed with the Templars? That guy was a thief, and look at all the confusion and destruction this one thief caused. All the lives lost. Sure, you might say he wasn't one of La Volpe's, but who is keeping track of these guilds and their members? What exactly do they want out of this alliance? If they are aware of the pieces of Eden, do they want the power for themselves? Do they want a seat at the table alongside the assassins? How much money did they skim off the top of the piles and piles they robbed from the wealthy? It is perplexing to say the least that none of this was expanded upon or even brought up in the first place. Not even the Assassin's Creed wiki can provide any information pertaining to any of these questions. Am I being unreasonable here? Am I looking too far into things? None of this makes sense to me. Both the characters and story are confusing. The narrative has several plot points that feel forced and rushed, and the behaviors exhibited feel artificially inserted to pander the game time. Do you guys understand what I meant in the beginning now? This story is an absolute mess, man. And I could go on and on too. What exactly did Lucrezia know about this whole conflict, and why would Ezio assume she wasn't an agent of the Templars? Where was Fabio Orsini during the story? Why wouldn't he just assassinate Cesare? What exactly does Octavian know about both Brotherhoods? Is he in on the master plan of the Templars? If so, why wouldn't he be one to urge Rodrigo or Cesare to use the apple? If not, why would Ezio kill him? He allowed Micheletto to live, stating that merely propping up a tyrant is punishment enough for him, but Octavian propping up Cesare isn't allowed? Why did they make Lucrezia and Cesare secret lovers when not only is there no historical evidence of this, but it has little to no meaningful impact on the story? Since when does the apple grant you whatever sight Ezio uses to see Cesare's escape from prison? We have never seen this before. I thought it held illusionary powers. Now it holds truth powers too? And I'm sure there are many, many more questions that could be asked if I look deeper. This whole thing is a travesty. Now, let's discuss something some might call incendiary. Let's talk about indoctrination. It's not necessarily catastrophic that the game doesn't comment on it, but its absence is disappointing enough for me to devote a section to it anyway. As you all know, the story contains a major plot point and gameplay mechanic involving the recruitment of Roman citizens into the Assassin Brotherhood. The Order wishes to increase their ranks and further spread their influence across the country. This strategy is sound. Throughout both this game and the last, we have witnessed the ineptitude of the Assassin Brotherhood in various ways. We have seen this Italian order allow an ignorant, immature citizen don their very own robes and weaponry, carry out assassinations with no official permissions to do so, all the while keeping this young, impressionable man in the dark. We have seen the more experienced agents of this order barely assist our hero in these assassinations, even though it is their job, not his. We have seen the leader of this order lose a piece of Eden for no discernible reason, and we have seen permanent, lifelong members not being present in Rome during the struggle for the apple. All of this screams incompetence to me. Recruitment makes sense and needs to happen. We need new and fresh faces to replace the inept ones. Ezio takes his time to travel to different areas of Rome, searching out men and women who are victims of the Borgia and their violence. He asks them if they want to end the tyranny currently infecting Rome, and they join the assassins. The process here is fine in terms of gameplay, simple, quick, and straightforward, but as a plot device, I have many questions. This section involves the concept of indoctrination for several reasons. Before we begin, let's discuss three things. What is indoctrination? Is indoctrination inherently evil? And how does indoctrination relate to the story of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood? Indoctrination is the process of teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. There are several definitions that contain differing terms and words to define it, but this one fits perfectly into my discussion. People may confuse this word with teaching. To further clarify the difference between the idea of indoctrination and the idea of teaching, indoctrination is instruction given without the possibility of criticality, or at least without the desire for criticality. One must listen and follow, no questions asked. Teaching, on the other hand, invites and is open to questioning and critical thinking. Now, by its very nature, is indoctrination evil or even somewhat unethical? I am no philosopher, nor am I a sociologist, so please take what I am about to say with multiple grains of salt. I am fairly certain that indoctrination is, at a fundamental level, unethical. I believe that there are two concepts that need to be discussed with this statement: the intent of the instruction and the mental faculties of the target audience. If the intent of the instruction is to instill tenets that are not to be questioned, then one has already crossed the line between ethical teaching and unethical indoctrination. One might argue in defense of this by citing the example of parenting. Parents are charged with the molding and forming of their offspring's realization, understanding, and confrontation of life's challenges. They do not ask or desire to be questioned during a child's rearing. Gino, my son, Hold the door open for ladies that are behind you, and allow them entry first. Is this indeed indoctrination? My parents do not wish me to argue with them over whether I should have done this or not. I am to obey their commands and do what I'm told. However, ideal parents would take the time after the maturity of the child to explain the tenets passed on to them in order to justify the instructions. Loving parents intend their children to question their reality and the world around them once they are mentally able to. Children who have matured enough to think critically will then listen to the justifications, interpret them as they see fit, and choose to continue in that line of thinking or not. This is the crucial element of parenting. The distinctions made between what the parents know cannot be logically questioned now, but is able to be questioned later. And this leads seamlessly into my second concept, the mental faculties of the subject. Not only does the intention of not being questioned at all ever need to be absent, but the instructor needs to understand the psychological capacities of their audience. Children, the mentally ill, the emotionally distraught, and the victims of extraordinary circumstance are all classic targets of indoctrination. Why is this the case? The degree of psychological fortitude most commonly found in almost every other subject is either weakened or not there to begin with. It's easier, simpler. These targets do not wish to, or have the ability to, question the instruction. This is why we see the most extreme figures of history striking when the economy is disintegrated and there is uncontrollable violence in the streets. This is why we see very young children being taught the tenets of religion or transgenderism in grade schools. This is why we see the manipulation of depressed or abused individuals from money or other favors. It's easier, and the ones indoctrinating them know this. Listen to me now. Is there anything inherently wrong with an individual with drive and passion emerging from the ashes of a collapsed society? No. Is there anything inherently wrong with religious or transgendered people? No. Is there anything inherently wrong with asking a family member or friend for money or favors? No. All I am saying is that these are examples of when indoctrination is easier. If you do not have the intent of unquestionable loyalty with your teaching, and your teaching is not targeting the audience purely because of their level of mental faculty, then you are not indoctrinating them. Do you understand what I am saying? Good. Now, with all of that said, how does this tie back into the game's story? Ezio is actively recruiting for the Assassin Brotherhood. We see the moment Ezio saves these citizens from the situation they're in, then we see him inquire about dismantling the oppressive force in the city, then we see they are available to fight. There is not a single piece of dialogue or writing that explains what happened in between these 2 points. Ezio is part of an organization that fights for humanity's free will. The reason this conflict exists is due to an opposing organization, the Templars, that wishes to dominate the minds of the masses. This is possible because there were beings that came before humans that designed artifacts of ancient technology with varying levels of metaphysical power and psychological restriction. The Templars wish to use these pieces of Eden to control humanity and stop the violence and bloodshed that has enveloped the species since its dawning. The Assassins wish mankind to reach this level of peace through their own free will, without the influence of force or manipulation. How in the world is one meant to be given this information? All up front, a little at a time? You might want to point me in the direction of the last game, where we witnessed firsthand Ezio's journey to be introduced and invited into the Order, but this, I believe, is a special case. Ezio was not only the son of a very prominent and active assassin in the region, but the mentor at the time was his very own uncle. Side note here, in my last look back, I mistakenly believed that Machiavelli was the mentor, but he only became mentor after Mario's death in this game. Mario was indeed the mentor of the Italian Brotherhood during the second game and up until his death. My bad. So, Ezio's journey into membership was built upon family ties and blood relations. Sure, it is a possibility that in an alternate reality, Mario and Ezio are not related whatsoever, and Mario could have found Ezio after his family members' executions, but that's a slim chance at best. Ezio already had a fundamental loyalty to Mario and a willingness to listen and join the Brotherhood due to his father's and uncle's already existing membership. As a result, this does not provide us with adequate evidence that other individuals' journeys to join the Order would mirror Ezio's. The ones we are recruiting are regular citizens, totally innocent and ignorant bystanders that are caught up in the violence of the Templars and asked to join. The reason this is important is because the trust involved in the grooming of Ezio, namely the information that was dumped onto him, already had a foundational element to it: family. If we are an assassin recruiting a stranger, we don't have the luxury of that trust. The surrender of the information pertaining to the goals, drives, purposes, and history of both orders has a long list of assumptions that are married to it. Recruits need to be trusted. They cannot be ones that are privy to all the knowledge an assassin can give them and not be a part of it. They would be too dangerous to society. They could reveal too much. Because of this, I'm not exactly sure how this process would actually work. What elements of the world do you explain to them? What parts of reality do you reveal? What if Ezio explains to a citizen that the oppression done to the city around them was the work of the Templars, but after learning more about the philosophy of the rival order, come to agree with it? What if they agree with the idea that the short-term loss of some freedoms yield a long-term gain of worldwide prosperity? What if they agree that humanity is a lost cause and incapable of peace on its own? What if they agree that the free will of the populace is a cancer to the global unification that could end the evils that inhabit the world? If a recruit voices any of these doubts, and you are not able to convince them otherwise, what is the course of action an assassin should take? The only thing to do, in my opinion, is to kill them. Consider the implications of allowing a turncoat to run free. They can join the Templars and reveal all your secrets, your members, your plans and designs, your outposts and bases, or perhaps even worse, they could just go their own way. Now you and your fellow assassins are not only fighting the Templars, an already vast network of highly competent individuals banding together, but now rogue agents that have the capability of amassing huge numbers of third-party followers. There is precedence for this behavior, by the way. Savonarola from the previous title discovered and used the Apple of Eden not for the assassins, not for the Templars, but for himself and himself alone. The assassins cannot have Savonarolas running around, devising plans for the world and using pieces of Eden to make those plans manifest. This isn't sustainable. Salvi, one man, took over an entire city for years and destroyed decades of knowledge and literature in the bonfire of vanities. Imagine an entire world of Salvis running around, obsessing over and endlessly searching for pieces of Eden. To have a recruit go against your teaching and instruction would be catastrophic to the entire purpose of the Order. And because of this, I don't see how an assassin could allow a recruit to go against them. So, this is not teaching. This is indoctrination. It has to be. If you reveal everything at one time in one massive monologue of lore and history, then there is a possibility the recruit could disagree with a few things. If they disagree, they must be annihilated. If you reveal things slowly, one historical figure or event at a time, then you are keeping them in the dark to the true nature of the conflict. Whether you agree with the assassin ideology or not, this is nothing more than manipulation. You don't think this is manipulation or indoctrination? Okay, I haven't convinced you yet. Let's try a real-world scenario. Let's say you are a master assassin, and you approach an individual with the intent of recruitment. You approach him or her and inquire as to whether a tyrannical force in his very own city should be done away with, and coincidentally, you are a member of an organization who is actively fighting this force. He agrees it must be stopped or destroyed and joins up with you. Now you must teach him who this tyrannical force is, correct? Let's present a mission statement for and against each order, shall we? The Templar Order is an organization that fights for global prosperity. It understands mankind's yearning for leadership in a world plagued by war and violence. The evil committed each day is a travesty that must be stopped, and this order will pay any price, overcome any obstacle, to rid the world of the corruption that infects it. Or, the Templars are a vast, tyrannical network of power-hungry, terroristic monsters that intend on dominating the minds of the masses, controlling societies, and governing the world through the use of terror and force. The Assassin Brotherhood is an order that believes in worldwide peace for humanity. Although the road to get there is paved with unending sacrifice and loss, the power of self-determination will provide mankind the freedom from outside influence they so deserve. Or, the Assassins are a band of pseudo-pacifist murderers that utilize fear and violence to align the world and its trajectory as they see fit. Which description best explains each order? Well, all of them. All of these statements are correct. The only difference lies in who has control of the narrative, and who the audience to said narrative is. And in our scenario here, Ezio has control of that narrative. Sound like indoctrination? It does to me. Not only does the narrative being uttered to the recruits depend on the person voicing it, but the recruits themselves are already in a position where their mental faculties have been influenced. Every single recruit we come across has a valid, emotionally charged reason to join the Assassins. They have been suffering at the hands of the Templars for some time now. Some have had their partners or children killed, some have had their businesses burned down to the ground, some have had their finances and families taken away from them altogether. All have been physically assaulted, and each and every citizen here lives in a society that is collapsing before their very eyes. Remind you of anything? The procedure through which an individual is recruited for the Assassin Brotherhood, at least from what I can perceive in this story, is brainwashing. Ezio cannot tell them everything at once without a chance of the recruit disagreeing with a tenet of the ideology. He cannot trickle the truth upon them without keeping them in the dark to some degree. If they go against his teaching, he cannot allow them to go free. This fulfills my first portion of crossing the line of ethical teaching and unethical indoctrination. Criticality and opposition cannot be invited. In addition, all of the recruits have been subjected subjected to violence and oppression, rendering their mental faculties partially, and in some cases totally, compromised, fulfilling my second assumption when dealing with this concept. This is not teaching, nor guidance. This is indeed indoctrination. Now listen, I know this has been quite a long section, and maybe some of you aren't really interested in this kind of stuff, but I found it fascinating to explore. The inner workings of how these orders function and operate is what makes me tick, and I love to venture out into the practices of these brotherhoods for the sole reason of them being inherently unknown or even enigmatic to us. Let me also say that this is not at all me grilling the game. Yes, I do believe it's very disappointing that the universe doesn't really touch on this, outside of our protagonist's induction journeys into the order throughout the series, but I think it's fine if the universe wants me to believe that indoctrination is the process by which new recruits are brought into the order. I accept that. All I'm trying to do is discuss these processes and explore the implications of them. I just wish it was laid out in a more efficient way instead of its complexity having to be scrutinized to this degree. Even though this adventure into the practices of these two warring factions was very interesting to me, the story as a whole was not. I truly think this is one of the worst stories Assassin's Creed has to offer. I am truly baffled by the audience reception of this title if it is indeed relying on the narrative side of this game. This story is a sequel to Assassin's Creed 2. As in, it's a continuation of, not the beginning to, a story. The second title in the franchise introduced us to a new time period, a new protagonist, a new set of characters, and a totally new environment and locale. It hinged on the rise of a new assassin in a tumultuous time. The enigmatic nature of his uncertainty drove Ezio to journey from place to place, and in these travels, he uncovered the corruption throughout his country. He learns about ancient orders and their ideological aims. He chooses one order and rebukes the other. The latter he fights with everything he has. In the second game, the Templars had legitimate, dangerous power through both the government and the church, and were attempting to consolidate that power into tyrannical rule. In this game, we witnessed the consequences of this dangerous power and expected it to be even darker and more serious in nature. But it wasn't. I dismantled almost every facet of the narrative and explained why they didn't work. I showed examples of how and when the story was sometimes contrived, sometimes unnecessarily complex, sometimes too simple, sometimes nonsensical, and sometimes artificially dramatized. The culmination of the Italian Templars' designs in the second title turned out to be a dud in the third title, where characters and events did not line up with the situations at hand, and Ubisoft's adherence to real history once again ended up not making much sense at times. Although the Assassin Brotherhood was back and more of a focus than ever before, some of the members that were supposed to be around were totally missing, and even the ones that were around didn't do much at all. The plotline involving the mysterious intentions of Machiavelli were completely baseless, and the narrative showcasing the growth of the Order was confusing to say the least. Although I did accept the procedure of recruitment in the end, I wish the writers did more work to explain this procedure, rather than me doing all the work myself. Rodrigo Borgia, the Templar Grand Master and main villain from the second game, turned into a completely different person with justifications that didn't add up, and the new villain that was introduced was protected by a hedge of plot armor that allowed him to escape time and time again. Moreover, the ancillary antagonists present in this game were pathetic, hollow shells of their first game counterparts, with little to no dialogue or reasons for their existence. Our hero, Ezio, was more active than ever before, but running around with purposes and motivations that go against not only his second game persona, but also the tenets of his own order. The world we inhabited was smaller, much smaller in scale, both figuratively and literally, and although one might argue the narrative might be realized in a more concentrated way due to this change, I would argue it did the opposite. Locations and cities, and the characters within them, were absent, and as a result, the threat of Italy's takeover by the Borgia suffered because of it. It is with considerable difficulty to claim that many in my audience will agree with me on this stuff, even after my justifications. I know this game holds a very special place in your hearts, and I do not want to take that away from you. I don't want to rob the fantastic experiences a majority of you, including I myself, have had with this game. However, it's important to realize that sometimes audiences of a particular series can get carried away with self-fulfilling prophecies without seeing its faults. When I played the game during its release, I was already so inundated in the Assassin's Creed universe that I didn't pay too much attention. My young age played a part in that too. But now that I'm older and I can look at it with a more broad, objective point of view, even with my love and passion for the series, I cannot overlook its faults. And this is the entire point of a critique. Despite all of this, I know that certain parts of a game can be overshadowed by other parts, and with this point, I firmly believe that this story was undeniably overshadowed by its